Great. So today we're meeting with Konstantina Orlandatou, a musician-composer working in VR. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your musical background, and the context in which you're working with VR?
Yeah, thanks again for the invitation, and I hope this time everything works fine. So I'm Konstantina. Originally, I'm coming from Greece, Athens, Greece, where I studied composition, and actually I used to play accordion, but it was too boring studying composition, so I wanted to do something more with multimedia. So I came to Hamburg, where I'm based now, the last 16 years, and studied multimedia composition, where we actually, try to embed technologies in our artistic projects. So you have a very big spectrum of doing interactive installations, work with the sensors, with audio, with video. And it turned out slowly into a very interesting, at least for me, area. And the last 5-6 years, I have implemented virtual reality technologies in my artistic work, because from the beginning that I started multimedia composition, I was very interested into visual arts, and I found very interesting virtual reality as a medium to work with constraints, with some limitations, but with many, many advantages. So I'm a classical composer, but went in the direction of virtual reality and doing things with these technologies.
Great. And how do you think your background as a composer contributes to your work in VR?
So composer, background composer, okay, you always work like with instruments or writing scores for instruments, even if it's free improvised and stuff like that. But I'm not a developer myself, or I'm not somebody that comes from the engineering side. So it has always been experimenting and trying to find new ways to make music, I guess, because what I'm doing also in VR, it's connected to music. And I guess it has a lot to do how you think as a composer and how you work with a medium that you want to work with. I don't know if I should mention already my project and what I do, because it's much, I think it's a much easier way to understand what I'm doing also in VR and my, let's say, perspective. So I have a project the last 5 years, it's called Moving Sound Pictures, where I take paintings of well-known painters, actually the classic moderns, like paintings from Matisse, Wassily Kandinsky, Picasso, and so on. And I turn them into a 3-dimensional space in a virtual reality environment, of course. And then the user has the opportunity to interact with the objects of this environment and make music out of it. So with the interaction, you can trigger music and you can make your own sounds and so on. So for me, it was because I'm a composer. For us composers, let's say you tell a story, but in a time frame. You have a time. Time is always the biggest factor that you have to deal with when making music. And for me, it was always that visual arts or paintings, I mean, seem to be very static to me, although depending not on the technique now, but it's like in 2D. It's just like you have a picture. And I was always missing this kind of time factor in the painting. And what would it be if a painting could be somehow vivid, could have some life in it? And I discovered that with virtual reality, you can do so many things that they don't really exist in the real world. So why not to have a possibility in jumping into a painting and then interact with the painting and then make out of music with it? Because, paintings, they tell a story, but where is the music? For me, it's always music around. So that was the most appropriate medium to do so.
Great. And so obviously visual art inspires your work, and it's the specific painters. And so how do you choose the kinds of paintings you'd like to?
So when I studied multimedia composition, I was very fascinated by Wassily Kandinsky because it was about abstract art, but it has been claimed that Kandinsky was also synesthete. So it was, I get a lot into this kind of synesthesia topic and cross-modal correspondences, or how we match color and sound. And Kandinsky had developed, let's say, or he wrote his own theory about colors, that they should have sound. So this kind of synesthetic correspondence. And I was fascinated back then when I did my master's project some years ago. And I found it very interesting to start with Kandinsky. So Kandinsky has always been the reference point for me, because he had this special connection to music. And it's also the Kandinsky was also fascinated by music by the other side. So there was a very big correspondence between him and Alan Scherbeck, for example, because they were living in the same period. So I've started with abstract art because, yeah, it's abstract. You know, for you it can mean something else than it can mean for me. I mean, the meaning of the painting can be totally different. It has to do a lot with your individual background and how you translate for you, and if it makes sense, the painting, because it doesn't have to always make a sense. So I have started working with the classic moderns, practical reasons too, because in the virtual reality environment, you can make plane structures, you can work with squares and cubes and spheres and triangles and stuff like that. But it's much more about that it's abstract, that the meaning is different for every user, that he explores the environment. And if you use virtual reality technologies as a kind of an art mediation, I think that it's very interesting to go into this direction, because if you get a painting, I don't know, from what could I say, from Van Gogh or something, you always have, you understand the context. You see a sky with stars, for example, or you see a garden. But what about paintings like Miro or paintings for Mondrian, where you only see squares, and what does that mean for you? And it's much better to explore it, make you more curious, I think, to explore more.
And is there anything, any other art forms that inspire you, or any kind of artists that you can think of? I think last time you mentioned that you don't like to look at the
yeah, I don't like that's the funny thing. I mean, yeah, okay, I get some inspiration, but sometimes I like to get cut out a little bit of what's happening, because for me it has always been like that. I don't want to get, I mean, it's good to see things and compare and say and make your own reflection, why I like this and why I don't like the other, and things like that. But sometimes I'm feeling a little bit constrained, and then I'm coming into a kind of situation where I start to compare things, or to compare my own art and my own artistic work. And sometimes I have the feeling I'm much more free if I don't look what's happening out there. I think sometimes I get influenced. I'm very focused on my idea, and I say, okay, then I want to pull it through, and I don't want to see right and left what exists, because it constrains me somehow. But for me, the biggest inspiration, there are not a lot of contemporary artists where I can refer to, but the biggest, inspiration is the classic moderns, or a lot of pop art artists, especially in visual arts. Edward Hopper, for example, or different kind of artists. And from music, music, it's also a very big part of it, but I like the perspective, or what John Cage has always been saying, what is sound and what is music. So silence can also be music. So I'm very inspired by him in this sense.
That's great. John Cage often still resonates with everything we do, it seems.
Actually, it's so contemporary. It's like Marcel Duchamp, that he's talked about ready-mades and stuff like that. It's like John Cage for music, I always have the feeling. And he's so contemporary still. Whatever we do, it's like, everything can be art, you know. And I like it very much. It's a very kind of free interpretation of what art can be, and art should actually, it doesn't have to make always sense. It's much more about challenging you. I mean, something that's also not nice, it's art, because then you feel, oh, why it's not nice, or why I don't like it. That's exactly what art triggers. And I like the interpretation from John Cage in general.
Great. And also I've experienced some of your works when I was in Hamburg, and yeah, it does bring to mind that when you're in that environment, and if you're just an audience member who's never kind of done things in music, or but then suddenly you're finding these objects, these visual objects, and you're playing them.
Yeah, it's in a very metaphorical way. It's like you playing an instrument. I just see these paintings, I mean, a piano, for example, here that I have, I can press and whatever the keyboard, and I can make music out of it. But yeah, what about objects that they're in three-dimensional space? And then I use the objects of the painting, and actually you use the painting as an instrument. And you are the one who decides what you're going to hear, or with which object you're going to interact in the beginning. So it's interesting to see how you start, where you end, or why you end, for example. It's like making a piece with a whole new instrument that it's there. So I always see this in metaphor. Maybe it's not that direct to understand, but actually, yeah, the user and how you interact, and the order with which you interact with the objects, and the music that you make, then you make somehow your own artwork. It's like co-creating your own music. I mean, okay, some things are already pre-programmed or done for you, but on the other hand, how you interact and in which timeline you interact with the objects, it's your own kind of free will artwork, what you're doing there.
Just like an open score for like a
exactly. It's just an open score. It's like I don't know how we call it. It's not the cursor, but you have a timeline, in Finale or Sibelius, where you play the score and you see, and you can follow the score. And this kind of cursor, let's say, the timeline, it's the user inside this three-dimensional space. And where you move around, and how you move, and when you move around, it's like you define the piece of music that it's going to be heard and it's going to be made with this painting.
Yeah, so in a way it's very Cajun, like Cajun water music, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Like the water music and where he was going, and yeah, exactly.
Great. So just to get back to our questions, so could you tell us a little bit about the skills that you use as a composer in this VR work?
That's very interesting, because sometimes I always trying to understand where technology interferes with the composing or with the music. Sometimes you have constraints. I mean, every medium, whatever it is, it has constraints. It had benefits or advantages or disadvantages. And because it also has to do with the interaction, it's very difficult to say, okay, now I have a music in my mind and I compose as I would compose for an ensemble or for musicians. But then you always have the factor that you don't know what is going to be heard first and what is going to be the second event that will happen, or the third. So you always have to think that whatever kind of music you are doing, or a kind of sound design that you are doing for this environment, it has to fit no matter what kind of order you're going to have of the acoustic, let's say, events, of the events that are going to happen. So it's more about making music in a kind of a more, based a little bit more in the mood of the painting also, because you have a painting and then you see the painting is it's too dark, it's too bright. Does the painter uses bright colors, or it's just like only one single color, or everything it's very strict, or different textures have different kind of colors together. So I try to depict the colors that you have into sounds. Of course, it's my own kind of choice. I'm not a synesthete myself. I don't have this kind of a special gift of, seeing colors and hearing sounds. But I'm inspired, of course, from this also phenomenon. But it's more kind of the mood and the inspiration. It's how do I perceive and what kind of feeling has this painting? Yeah. So should I use a more dissonant kind of sounds? It should be more harmonical. Should be the sound be normal classical instruments, or we can combine, I don't know, paintings from the 20th century with electronic sounds. Why not? And to make it more fresh and more contemporary, that it's more fitting to our now society and how things are evolving. But on the other hand, you always have to think the interactivity. How is the interaction? What kind of feedback does the user get? So everything has to be. So on one hand, you have the mood and the feeling and the inspiration of the painting that you are trying to depict into the music. On the other hand, you have to think a little bit more in a technical way that all of the events that happen should fit with each other, because you don't know which order is going to be taken by the user.
And are there skills that you had to acquire to work with VR?
Learn the software and learn the hardware, of course. So it's all about choices nowadays. Or when I started, I have to say, I have to admit, I had no idea of VR. I mean, I have used VR as a just user. I remember I was a visitor in an exhibition, but I was like, okay, now that it was again, we had a funding from the German government that we could, that's why I had the opportunity to do the project. And I was like, oh, okay, now I have to learn VR, so I have to make decisions. And if you want to make environments, 3D environment or virtual reality environments, so either you use Unity or Unreal. It's the two engines that actually exist to make this kind of environments. And I decided to go to Unreal. So I had to learn Unreal in the beginning. So the first 6 months, I had to learn how you can do things. I mean, Unreal is based in C++ as a language, but I'm not a developer myself that I build tools. I'm just a good user of the software. So I had to learn this first. And then, of course, to see, because I do different kind of demonstrations, or a project of the moving sound pictures have been exhibited in the National Gallery here in Hamburg. And it was an installation that it was running for 3 months, and you had to consider that the hardware is stable, that, you know, I mean, visitors can use it all the time and you don't have crashes. And so you learn also this way of the hardware and what it's reliable. I'm using, for example, since years, HTC Vive Pro. That's my system to work with. So a lot of technological skills, and of course, how you make also the sound, because these engines have the opportunity to implement sounds. But sometimes you see that you can also use middleware. So middleware are, let's say, all kind of software that it's coming from the gaming, music design or sound design, and it's kind of an interface that you use sometimes between the engine and the sound. Sometimes I use F-mode. It's a middleware for sound, for video gaming, but it's looks like very much like a sequencer, so it makes my logical thinking much more easier than working with the engine. But yeah, a lot of technological skills that had to be acquired in order to be independent, and you can work, of course, on your own and not being dependent on people to do things for you. So it's a little bit of one-woman show sometimes. And of course, then for 3D animation and for the 3D artwork, you need somebody external, of course, that I have a very good 3D artist who makes these environments for me. Otherwise, Kandinsky wouldn't like Kandinsky, wouldn't be like Kandinsky, would be something else, because I'm not, but not good in visual arts, I have to say.
Yeah, it's important to collaborate on something that is sometimes beyond.
And you know, the 3D artist, that's his job. I mean, that he's there, that's his job to do nice graphics, nice visuals, which are very important if you want to use virtual reality. Yeah? I mean, you cannot have virtual reality without visuals. It's paradox. Why then to use the medium if you don't have something to see? Because using the headset is like having your head looking through a window, actually. So you want to see something there.
And how do you find that these tools that you are using in VR have influenced your composition in general? Like, do you now go back and make audio? I mean, just instrumental or acoustic? Or
I have to say that instrumental music I haven't written. It feels like ages. I think the last music that I really composed for instruments, I think it was for timpani and fixed media. It was 2015, so it has been almost 8 years that I haven't really wrote for acoustic, composed for acoustical instruments. There is a limitation in a sense, but now I have the feeling that I do much more of sound design than really making a composition as a piece that you would hear alone, because it's always, sometimes I'm wondering if, because the visual, vision in general has a much more power for our humans as a visual perception. I think it's much more powerful for us than audio perception, auditory perception. Sometimes I'm saying, is music only like a kind of secondary thing? Or what is the place of music in my artwork, in my project? But on the other hand, I'm very focused on music. So, but I'm getting much more into details. Okay, I don't write a very big composition. I don't write for acoustical instruments. I do much more of sound design, but I have realized that I'm working the sound much more in a sense that it has to do with the timbre, how the sound it's inside, what is my object there, because it's connected also with the texture of the object that you have in your hands. Is it more of a smooth sound? It's more of a rough sound. So I'm seeing that I don't write a whole composition, but I'm getting much more into detail of what I want the sound to be. So a little bit, my compositional process has a little bit changed, because the medium needs to be, the music in the medium has to be
I guess
adjusted.
it's more embodied, like you would say.
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
Spaces.
Yeah.
You have to think of that a little bit, of how the object is embodied by the user.
Yes, exactly. And indeed, in the VR environment, you have an object there. It is an entity for you, because, I mean, okay, you perceive it only with your hands. I still haven't tried using, for example, a bodysuit or something like that, where you have feedback everywhere. That could be possible too. But at least, you have feedback, and you have the feeling that, you're holding something there in your hand. So it's like having really an object, and this object has an entity. And how do I interpret this kind of entity in the sound too?
Great. And because in VR, you're not creating a piece, but it's more like a user experience. It is a piece, but the user has to experience it. So that changes the notion of what a performance is as well, I guess.
True. It's like, that's true. For me, it's not kind of a performance. I'm doing a system, a closed system, but afterwards it's like I'm building an instrument. I'm building an instrument, and then the user comes, and then he uses this instrument for himself on his own. And I see it much more that I built an instrument there, rather than I compose music as a kind of musical piece.
Yeah, and I think in the last interview you mentioned that when people come to the gallery, they have these really kind of out-of-body experiences in the paintings. So that was really interesting. Some of the experiences you were saying people had.
Totally. I mean, it's very interesting to see how people react when they try out the installation or the experience. You see that people that are older are more hesitant also. So they, just for the people may haven't understand exactly what's happened, but you have a physical space like 4 meters to 4 meters where people can move around freely. There's nothing in the room, so there are no obstacles. But it's funny to see that, because in VR, the world that you perceive is the virtual world. I mean, if you use VR, it's not your physical world. You're totally cut out of your physical world. And if you see, for example, a square standing in the middle of your way, it's so funny because you see the user that he tries to climb or jump over the square that's in the virtual room, but he tries it also to do it in the physical room, but the physical room is empty. So it's really funny to see how your mind actually simulates and how your mind is being tricked in a way between this discrepancy of virtual and physical world. And sometimes you see that people often that are older are a little bit hesitant also to move, or they don't really understand that now the virtual world is their normal world where they can move. And sometimes they're hesitant, so they need a little bit of how we say that, motivation, somebody to tell them, oh, now you can walk in front, or you can walk freely in the space. It's nothing there that blocks the room. Whereas you see children, for example, or much more younger people that are more, let's say, acquainted a little bit also with the medium, no restrictions there. I mean, children, they move around, they jump around. You see that they can really adjust in the new environment. And it's, yeah, it's a little bit interesting to see, not a little bit, it's much interesting to see when you're outside, how they react. But I have to say that the projects have been shown. I mean, a lot of people have tried it already out, and everybody, it's like, comes out with a very big smile. So I think that's the biggest, how to say that, confirmation, or what I like, because it's still, it makes fun for the people. They have the feeling that they do something in this space. They have the feeling that they co-create something. And that's a very important thing for me. It makes me very motivated to continue and do more and more stuff in this area.
So do you think working with people and getting this reaction kind of deepens your understanding of like the music and the virtual reality worlds that you're creating, and where you would like to take next?
Totally. I mean, in the beginning, you have a feeling that things could work out, but then when you test them, or not when you test them, when you test them, or you have an installation that it's running, and you see that your guessing was right, and this has been confirmed, and you say, okay, I have thought everything well, everything went as I thought it would go. Now there are many thoughts to go a little bit further. I mean, still stay in this virtual reality area, but now we got an extension of the funding for the project, so we are going for more extra 5 years, and now we have another constellation. We are founding. We're starting the Ligeti Center here in Hamburg, which is actually a center that has to do with the new innovative formats and for music creation and performance. And again, has been financed. We got a financing from the government, from the German government, from the Ministry of Research and Education. And now we have a bigger cooperation also with other universities here in Hamburg, with the University of Applied Sciences and the Technical University. And we are going to have a collaboration with the Haptic Lab. And now the idea is to, with the hardware that you have now, that they exist actually, like HTC Vive, or even if MetaQuest or Oculus Quest, how it was being called beforehand, you always have a kind of limitation with the controllers. You always have controllers. There are specific controllers. You can only push buttons or just grab things. And now we want to start doing special haptic interfaces so that the user can really have a feedback that he touches really a rough surface, or he touches really a smooth surface. Or we have also some ideas to work with the National Gallery, because they don't only have paintings, but they have also sculptures. And what if also sculptures had the voice, or they would make also music, if I can touch them and I can have a kind of, the sculpture itself is a kind of a musical interface to use and make music with it. So I'm going into more this direction of trying to develop some things or to develop new tools that would be much more appropriate for the experience, and not only to have what already exists, because there are still some limitations there.
Yeah, that's great. The haptics make me think that it would make the VR experience more accessible, let's say, to people who have limited, visual capabilities.
Yes.
Or mind. I think that's it's a really nice way to experience paintings.
Yeah, and you always have to think that if, for example, you have a context where the installation is being shown in a museum, you want that everybody can experience that. So it can be a 5-year-old child up to 85 years old visitor of the museum, or somebody that is in a wheelchair. For example, I was in Berlin in November showing the project, and a visitor came and she was in a wheelchair, and I was like, oh, okay, could it work? I mean, it worked perfectly, because then you have to think that the objects that are in the space, in the VR space, have to be grabbed, or be possible to be grabbed by somebody who's in a wheelchair, or by a small child that cannot grab everything that it's above 2 meters or something. So you have to think all of these things, and it has to be also inclusive. I mean, it can be, the experience can be for everybody, even if for people that they don't have are maybe blindsided, or they have difficulties also in vision. So it should be for everybody. Of course, you cannot be that experimental, because we're talking about an average of people coming to the museum. So if you want that it works out for a 5-year-old child and for an 85-year-old man, it has to be done not in a very experimental way. So it has to be somehow intuitively made for everybody to understand and to have the best experience out of it.
Is that sometimes limiting to you? Because I guess in composition we're used to, like, okay, let's make new things, the new things which no one has heard before. But do you find like kind of making it?
Yeah, it limits it.
Anyone.
It has a limitation, because you have to think that not everybody is acquainted with the medium, that people have hesitations, people may be not acquainted with technologies, and you don't have to be. That's the important thing. But it limits, yeah, because you have to, at the end, indeed, a little bit keep it simple. Otherwise, I mean, you can do complex things. We had another project with a student of mine from the University of Applied Sciences, where they tried to make a virtual environment based on sound.
Hello? Oh no, there's freeze.
Go from one room to another, and then you saw that people had difficulties following, because yeah, they have to overcome this kind of hesitation that comes along with a new medium. But I think that's the beginning of it. I don't think that after 10 years, although a very big questionnaire, what happens after 10 years in VR, or how long we're going to go with this medium, because I don't know, sometimes I'm thinking maybe it's a new hype, maybe not. Now also with metaverse and what everything, yeah, you know, it's like Second Life in 2000, that you had this new Second Life kind of virtual game and world, that you have avatars and stuff like that. But what happened? It was a hype for 6-7 years, and then I do believe that VR has a lot of advantages, because you can use it for simulations, for training, for building up worlds, for collaborative work, for everything. So I do believe that it's going to exist. I don't think that it's going to replace, I hope not, but it's going to replace our normal lives and routine. I see it much more of a tool where you can have many possibilities. But I think this kind of acquaintance and hesitation with the media, with the medium, it's going to start vanishing, I guess, from time to time, because you see also the museums or wherever you go that people try to make things for VR. You see that now, and when you go to museums, everybody has something with VR, or at least with augmented reality. So you see that it comes more and more and more. And until the prices go a little bit down so that everybody has it at home, I think the museums or the galleries or bigger institutions, they're always going to have this kind of offering.
Great. And this project you mentioned, is this something you're working on now? Is it the
Yes, it's like an extension of the Moving Sound Picture. I mean, the project is it's called, and it's gonna stay as a Moving Sound Pictures project as a title. And now we are planning for the next 5 years what we want to do, also with the National Gallery here in Hamburg, because we have already some ideas, and with the Haptic Lab. So we have to see what we're going to do for the next 5 years and what kind of milestones and what kind of installations we can do. Because don't forget also for the institutions, I mean, if you work with an institution, they want also to implement, for example, their own kind of educational or mediation programs that they want to have, because important is that the visitor learns something with the artwork. It's not only doing and participating and interacting with the artwork, but taking also something with you when you come out of the museum, that it's very valuable. So yeah, we're going to continue with the project and see what happens. I find it very, very interesting. There are also some other ideas to pursue, also that refers to graphic scores and graphical notation in a VR environment. That's another part that I'm looking to, because it's the same side, let's say, it's the opposite side of the same coin, actually, because I would like also to implement, for example, graphical scores or animated graphical scores in VR in real time. That's also very promising. I think it's everything is possible. The technology is there. It's just you have to develop stuff, but it's also these two topics that I want to follow. So continuing with the paintings and with new interfaces, but also looking of how we can implement, for example, graphic animated scores in VR, and maybe also musicians that are in VR. So we'll see. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, many people on this tour that we come across, they are very students, when they come in contact with these digital animated scores, they're quite excited, because it's something they can understand right away, because it's kind of comes from their culture of watching animation and
exactly. That's the power of visuals. I think the power of vision, as you say, from animations, from this kind of area, which is actually very, very come always a German word now in my mind, but it's very popular for the young generations. It's very, very popular.
Yeah, so it kind of has the power to bring people, students together who actually might not have like amazing, sight reading skills, or are still kind of beginning in their, learning music. And
yeah, I think it's with the animated scores, I think you're more free to develop your own kind of language, and how it's again how you interpret the score, and you have a kind of a freedom there. I think too.
Not that it replaces, let's say, but it adds another layer, something they can also take back to notated music if they want.
That's true. That's true. Yes.
Great. And is there anything else you'd like to tell us and our viewers about VR and your experiences with it and your work?
Yeah, that's only, I mean, yeah, the question that I always have now in this phase, it's like, where all this VR thing is going to land, or where we're going with this medium, and what will happen in the next years, because as I said before, the potential is very, very big, what the medium can offer. The thing is how we, not only the artists, but also for, let's say, for how we can use the medium as a window or as a door for new opportunities, where you can experiment a lot, where you can do stuff that normally you wouldn't do, how you can make music, for example, also in VR. And I know that artists do music and play music in VR, like with avatars and with bodysuits and motion capturing technologies. And I mean, Corona showed us a lot of things that can happen and can also happen online. Limitations still exist at this point. It's not impossible, it's never impossible, but sometimes you have a lot of constraints in making content in VR. It's still not something that you say, oh, okay, let's do it. It's easy to do. It still needs a lot of work you have to put a lot of work to achieve something good in VR. But I guess that we are progressing, because I think that the interest and the opportunities are going to grow more and more in the next years. And I do believe that at some point the headset, like now I have a headset also at this, it's not gonna be as it is. I do believe that it's gonna be much more thinner. It's not gonna be that heavy. It's gonna be easy. You're not gonna have at a point this cable that constrains you, because you cannot freely use a space. You always have to think about the cables or the controllers. I think that we are going there, and we are going, I mean, the interest is there. The market is big. Sometimes they say, okay, but why not a lot of people, how said, make money with VR? That's another also thing to think about, but I think it has to do with the progression of technologies. I mean, what has been 5 years ago, and now the steps that we are doing 5 years later, a lot of things are possible, and I think it will come by time. Maybe we need some time, not now in 5 years, but in 10 years, I think everything will be much more easier. And I would love to see also concerts, either in free improvisation, in whatever context that could be, where these kind of technologies are being mixed. I mean, it doesn't mean that everything has to be in VR. It doesn't mean that everything has to be in the real world. Why not to mix stuff? They are there to mix, and
it could be extended reality also, right?
Exactly, like extended reality. I mean, things are there, and we should mix them. It's not only everything in online or in virtual, and everything either it's online or in presence. No. We can do a lot of things. I remember 13 years ago in the University of Music and Drama in Hamburg, where I am, we were doing network music performances, and the artists were in Hamburg, the other ones were in Belfast, the other ones were in Graz, and we were making music at the same time. So it was happening 13 years ago, and it still happens now. So it would be nice to combine virtual and real world together. So why not?
More than we have been doing, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for meeting me for the second time.
Thank you for inviting me again.